have no right to even talk to a man unless they're offering him sexual companionship. Is that the kind of response that you saw on the hashtag when you were going through it, or was I just seeing all the crazies?
I mean, I had those crazies in my mentions. It wasn't just on the hashtag. They were writing to women specifically. I spoke to Zerlina Maxwell, who had to report some of the tweets because they got very violent, and even, the MRAs, that no one sort of stood up for women. No one said this, we don't endorse this kind of behavior. And as you mentioned, the only comments that we saw coming out of these forums from the pickup artists was, if only you had come to us, because clearly this kind of violence is justified. This kind of violence against women is valid.
Well, that's quite an assertion, isn't it? We have 6 people dead from a rabidly crazy 22-year-old misfit shooter. The feminist movement and the pro-women movement want to make it about themselves. And yet an interesting column ran in Breitbart questioning whether this shooter, alleged shooter, was a misogynist at all. And we have now the writer of that joining us, Milo Yiannopoulos. Thank you for being with us, Milo. And I found it a very interesting take you had, because as soon as this crime happened, instantly, given the guy's YouTube post, we all began to see this as a violence against women thing. So give us your take on why that's the wrong direction.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's a funny sort of misogyny, isn't it, that ends up with more men dead than women. Look, the point about this guy is that now, there are lots of things that affected him in his life, which helped to shape his violent fantasies. There are lots of things in the world around him that he seized on and he used to develop this persona that we saw in the YouTube videos. Now, if there was something that affected him the most in the culture around him, I don't think it was some kind of entrenched patriarchy, as the feminists love to say. In my view, it was video games. I know a lot of people are fixated on movies because his dad was a director. In my view, watching that YouTube video, he looks and sounds like nothing so much as one of the loner, sociopathic protagonists of a video game with the affected laugh, the campy manner. And it's that, I think, which most shaped the way that he acted out. But the important thing to realize about this guy is that he was nuts. And when people are nuts, as we saw with Anders Breivik even, it's very dangerous to try to leverage your own political prejudices to explain what they did. And I'll just, briefly say, and this is a strong opinion, but I got to say I believe this. We hear from the feminists this guy was a misogynist, and it was his misogyny that spilled over into murder. Well, I'm sorry, but if there's a mental illness in this picture, as far as I'm concerned, it is the absurd and offensive sociopathy required to see a horrible personal tragedy and immediately leverage it for political gain. And that's what's happened, actually.
Well, and that's what happens after every shooting spree, every mass shooting. Instantly, the anti-gun activists come out. In this case, the terribly tragic father of one of the dead victims came out and said, when will the NRA wake up? When will we start to do this? And then, of course, the media picks that up and takes it on out there. And yet, I mean, a tragedy has just happened. And now with online and the news cycle is so much faster, we instantly start looking for blame. Now, I think that your column makes an awfully good point, that this guy is not a woman hater. That's not what drove him to kill. It's because this guy was depressed and angry and psychotic himself. But when you then, Milo, build a bridge over and say also he was mimicking video games, it's a very interesting read, and it shows that you know those video games, but it sounds like you're citing that as a blame factor. And yet in the wake of a tragedy like this, if the guy's simply psychotic, isn't it true that there's no real cause? He was going to do this one way or another no matter what.
Actually, that's exactly what I think. What I wrote, it's a slightly subtly different point. I think what I was trying to say was that if there is an influence that helped to shape his violent fantasy, then I think it was video games, and maybe movies too, more than it was any kind of entrenched society patriarchy, which is what the feminists would like you to believe.
Right.
Now, that was my point. My point was simply that when you watch these videos, you get the impression that he is playing out not a misogynistic fantasy, but a video game fantasy. And what's so terrifying about this person, and the reason we know this is just a crazy lunatic, the thing that makes it really unsettling when you're watching the video is it's clear that this is an individual for whom fantasy has bled into reality. This is somebody who is no longer able to tell the difference between video games and the movies that maybe his father directed and real life. And he thinks that an appropriate response to his trauma is to go out and shoot people. Now, that is not the response of a misogynist. It's the response of a nutcase.
Yeah, you would think that if it was all misogyny, he would have gone after woman after woman after woman instead of starting off his murder spree, I believe, with the actually knifing and stabbing of 3
men.
So
two points on that. One is, I don't encourage any of your readers to read his rambling, crazy manifesto, but unfortunately that's the task I set myself as a journalist, so I have read it. And, this guy killed men first because he thought of the entire species as disgusting. He felt that other human beings were revolting, and he wanted the world that he thought would hurt him to hurt in return.
Yeah.
And that's how we know that, it was one of those indiscriminate crazy killings.
You actually have a great line in here, and I'm going to read it because I write sometimes myself. I appreciate good writing. And you say, it's clear what's going on. For this dorky loner, video games have become an alternate reality in a terrifyingly literal sense. Fantasy had bled into the real world, inspiring and structuring his violent fantasies. You basically say any target would have sufficed. And indeed, he said he hated all humanity. He can blame women for not getting lucky, but if he really wanted to do something about that in California, it seems like it would have been pretty easy to just go out and buy some affection.
Well, I mean, we all know how easy it is to get sex in California, particularly if, and I hate to compliment somebody who's done something like this, but particularly if you're not a bad-looking guy, and he wasn't a bad-looking guy. In fact, I think he was pretty much a textbook narcissist. I think he knew he was a good-looking guy, and that made it even more difficult for him to understand why he couldn't get attention from women. And as you say, I mean, California's not a difficult place to get sex.
No, at least that's what I hear or read about. I've never gotten particularly lucky there myself. Well, Milo, I think we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back. And when we come back, remind me so I don't forget, okay? I want to talk to you about the way the media covers these mass shootings, these tragedies, and whether, the media have long had a long-standing policy voluntarily where they decide we do not print the names of rape victims. We will respect rape victim privacy. And that has held for decades. It's loosened up a little bit in the last couple of years. But one wonders, what if the mass media decided we are not going to even publish the name of one of these creeps who does these killings? To heck with them. We're going to discuss that when we come back. Milo Yiannopoulos is with us. We'll be right back. I'm Dennis Neal.